Let's move now to the United States, and the deadline to airlift foreigners and their allies from Afghanistan is just 6 days away. There's concern that US President Joe Biden is turning away military interpreters and other allies in favour of US citizens and green card holders. Biden has until the 31st of August to withdraw his troops from the Taliban-controlled country. Meanwhile, the UK is calling for that deadline to be extended. The Taliban is warning, do not extend that deadline. Our US correspondent Simon Marks joins me from Washington, D.C. now. Hello, Simon. So, is Joe Biden betraying America's allies in Afghanistan, or does he have no choice, given that the Taliban is stopping locals from leaving?
Well, he's certainly rebuffing the demands of his G7 partners to extend this military operation, which he insists is going to wrap up on the entirely arbitrary date that he selected of August the 31st, a date that the Taliban insist is the final opportunity for international forces to remain on Afghan soil. But there are massive questions, not just about the extent to which President Biden once again disappointed allies, including the British, the French, the European Union more broadly, as a result of that virtual G7 summit leaders meeting yesterday, but massive questions here unanswered about whether he's even going to be able to get all the Americans out of Afghanistan who are still there. The White House is distributing numbers today that suggest that in the last 9 days they have airlifted 82,000 people out of Kabul. No question, that's a remarkable achievement, one of the most important and significant historic airlifts the world has ever seen. But when you drill down into those numbers, you discover that of the 83,000 people flown out, so far, only 4,400 are American citizens, and this time last week, the White House was guessing, and it is a guess, that there are between 12 and 15,000 Americans in Afghanistan. Today, the Pentagon said, ahead of that August the 31st deadline, a couple of days before, the priority at the airport is going to be to start flying troops and equipment out. And just to put this into perspective, there's 5,200 American troops at that airport in Kabul. So they're going to be pulling out more American troops next week than the number of American citizens they have so far withdrawn from Afghanistan, at a time when American citizens, other foreign nationals, and thousands of Afghans cleared to travel to the United States say they're being blocked from reaching the airport by the Taliban.
What are the risks of staying after the 31st of August? Is the Taliban likely to see it as a throwing down of the gauntlet?
Yeah, I mean, that's hard to know because the US government insists that it is communicating with the Taliban on a continuing basis. And we know, for example, that the CIA director, William Burns, made an undisclosed trip to Kabul earlier in the week to meet with Abdul Ghani Baradar, the de facto political head of what is about to become Afghanistan's new government. We've even heard of British troops going on security patrols with the Taliban outside Kabul airport over the course of the last few days. The Taliban have said August the 31st is a red line. They say there will be consequences if troops remain. But equally, President Biden appears to be very concerned about the possibility of a terror attack, not by the Taliban, but by ISIS-K, a splinter group of Islamic State that still operates in Afghanistan, that the White House says has made threats to US troops at that airport. But the other consequence of getting out by August the 31st is they will need to be very convinced at the White House that they're not leaving Americans behind, because on September the 1st, if the media here is dominated by stories of American citizens, never mind the Afghans that have worked with them over the last 20 years, being stranded behind Taliban lines by the Biden administration, there will be enormous consequences for President Biden politically here.
So what are the options on the table for him at this point? And surely a decision has to be made sooner rather than later, because it would look terrible on the 31st of August to say, oh, no, now we have to stay.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the president says he's asked the State Department and the Pentagon to draw up contingency plans in case the timeline needs to be adjusted. His Republican critics on Capitol Hill are rounding on him. They say he's capitulating to the Taliban and that what he ought to be doing is actually sending more troops in and making it clear to the Taliban that the United States will be staying, an occupying force in Afghanistan, in order to get the remaining American civilians and the Afghans who have helped them out of the country. His allies want him to stay. The European Union urged him yesterday to maintain a security operation at the airport for as long as necessary, an open-ended commitment they essentially wanted from him that he was unwilling to give. And the president's also under fire from Democrats on Capitol Hill because with midterm elections a year away, they're terrified that they're about to become the party that leaves Americans behind in Afghanistan. So he's in a terrible position, but it's largely, Sally, a position of his own making because he's the man who decided hastily to withdraw US troops by the arbitrary deadline of August the 31st, and to close down Bagram Air Force Base, where US forces were operating at the beginning of that process, rather than leaving it operational for any evacuation effort that needed to be mounted.
Thank you so much, Simon Marks, our correspondent in Washington. Still to come.